the story of a Nigerian two-headed prince of Warri South, the childless king. In the heart of Warri South local government area in Delta State, Nigeria, there lived a king named Oba Ewaresi Oluwasi. He was a man in his 60s with grey hair and kind eyes that showed the wisdom of many years. His wife, Queen Lolo Dokas Oluwasi, was a beautiful woman in her 40s with a gentle smile that made everyone in the kingdom feel welcome. The royal couple ruled their people with great love and care. Every morning, Oba Ewaresi would sit under the big Iroko tree in the palace courtyard to listen to the problems of his people. Farmers would come to him when their crops failed, and he would give them seeds and tools. Widows would come when they had no food, and he would make sure they never went hungry. Children who had no parents found shelter in the palace, and Queen Lolo Dokas would care for them like her own. The kingdom prospered under their rule. The markets were full of goods, the farms produced plenty of food, and the people lived in peace. But there was one big problem that made the king and queen very sad. After many years of marriage, they had no children of their own. Every night, Queen Lolo Dokas would pray to God and to the ancestors for a child. She would touch her flat belly and wonder why she could not give her husband an heir to the throne. King Oba Ewaresi would comfort her, but deep in his heart, he too was worried. Who would rule the kingdom when he died? Who would continue their good work for the people? The people of the kingdom also worried about this problem. They loved their king and queen, but they knew that every kingdom needed a prince or princess to continue the royal line. Some of the older women would whisper among themselves, "What will happen to us when our king joins his ancestors?" What King Oba Ewarisi did not know was that his most trusted advisor was actually his worst enemy. Elder Osaze, the village prime minister and Onwowu of the kingdom, was a tall, thin man with sharp eyes and a beard that was completely white. He had served the royal family for over 20 years, and everyone thought he was loyal and honest. But Elder Osaze had a secret plan. He wanted to become king himself when Oba Ewaresi died. He had been using dark magic to prevent Queen Lolo Dokas from getting pregnant. Every month, he would go to a powerful witch doctor who lived deep in the forest. There, he would pay money and bring sacrifices to make sure the queen's womb remained closed. As long as they have no child, Elder Osaze would tell himself, the throne will come to me when the old king dies. After all, I am his closest advisor and the most important man in the kingdom after him. Elder Osaze had 3 sons of his own. His eldest son, Emeka, was already 30 years old and very ambitious. Emeka knew about his father's plan and supported it completely. They would often meet at night to discuss how they would run the kingdom when they took over. "Father," Emeka would say, "we must be careful. If anyone discovers what we are doing, we will be banished or killed." "Don't worry, my son," Elder Osaze would reply. "I have been very careful. No one suspects anything. They all think the queen is just unlucky with children." But Elder Osaze's plan was about to face a big challenge. One hot afternoon, when the sun was high in the sky and most people were resting in their houses, a stranger arrived at the palace. He was a tall man with dark skin and wore simple white clothes. He carried a wooden staff and had kind eyes that seemed to see deep into people's souls. The palace guards brought the stranger to King Oba Ewaresi, who was sitting in his throne room with Queen Lolo Dokas beside him. Elder Osaze was also there, as he always was during royal meetings. The stranger bowed low before the king. "May you live long, your highness," he said in a clear, strong voice. "Welcome to our kingdom, stranger," replied King Oba Ewarisi. "What brings you to our palace?" The messenger looked directly at the king and queen. "Your highness, I have traveled from a far kingdom to bring you a message. I know about your problem, and I have come to help you." Elder Osaze's eyes narrowed when he heard this. His heart began to beat fast with worry. What did this stranger know? How could he help the king and queen? "What problem do you speak of?" asked Queen Lolo Dokas, though she already knew what the messenger meant. "Your highness," the messenger continued, "you have been trying to have a child for many years, but something is blocking your womb. This is not natural. Someone with bad intentions has used dark magic against you." Elder Osaze shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He wanted to tell the guards to throw this stranger out, but he knew that would make him look suspicious. King Oba Ewaresi leaned forward on his throne. "If what you say is true, can you help us break this curse?" The messenger nodded. "Yes, your highness, but you and the queen must come with me to River Kapoti. There you will find the cleansing you need." River Kapoti was a sacred river, about 2 hours' walk from the palace. The old people said that the river had special powers and that the spirits of good ancestors lived there. "When shall we go?" asked Queen Lolodokas, hoping to fill her voice for the first time in years. "Tomorrow at dawn," replied the messenger, "but you must come alone, just the two of you. No guards, no advisors, no servants. The spirits will only speak to pure hearts." Elder Osezi stood up quickly. "Your Highness, this could be dangerous. You should not go alone to the forest with a stranger. Let me come with you for protection." But the messenger shook his head. "The spirits have spoken clearly. Only the king and queen must come. If anyone else follows, the cleansing will not work." King Oba Ewaresi looked at his wife and she nodded. After so many years of disappointment, they were willing to try anything. "We will come," declared the king. The next morning, before the first cockerel crowed, King Oba Ewaresi and Queen Lolodokas quietly left the palace with the mysterious messenger. They walked through the sleeping village and into the forest, where the trees were tall and thick, and the air was cool and fresh. Elder Osaze had tried to follow them secretly, but somehow he kept losing their trail. It was as if the forest itself was protecting the royal couple from his evil eyes. When they reached River Kapoti, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with beautiful colors of orange and pink. The river was wide and clear, and the water moved gently over smooth stones. Birds sang in the trees, and butterflies danced in the morning light. The messenger led the king and queen to the edge of the water. "Your highnesses," he said, "you must wade into the river together and wait. When the spirits are ready, you will hear a voice telling you what to do." King Oba Ewaresi and Queen Lolodokas held hands and stepped into the cool water. They stood there for what felt like a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest and feeling the gentle current around their feet. Suddenly, the air around them became very still. The birds stopped singing, and even the wind stopped blowing. Then, from somewhere above the river, a deep, powerful voice spoke. "Ewaresi Oluwasi, King of Good Heart, and Dokas Oluwasi, Queen of Kind Spirit. Your suffering has not gone unnoticed. Your enemy has used dark magic against you, but his power is weak compared to the power of righteousness." The royal couple looked at each other with wonder and fear. The voice continued, "You must return here in 7 days with offerings. 7 white kola nuts, 7 white chickens, 7 white cloths, and 7 cowries. Bring also a pot of palm wine and honey from wild bees. When you have done this, the curse that blocks your womb will be broken forever." The voice began to fade, but before it disappeared completely, it said one more thing. "Beware of the one who pretends to serve you but wishes you harm. His evil deeds will return to him 7-fold. When the voice stopped, the forest came alive again. Birds resumed their singing, and the wind began to blow through the trees. The mysterious messenger smiled at the king and queen. "You have been blessed," he said. "Do exactly as the spirits have commanded, and your prayers will be answered." King Oba Ewaresi and Queen Lolodokas returned to the palace with joy in their hearts. For the first time in many years, they had real hope that they would have a child. But they decided to keep their visit to River Kapoti secret from everyone except their most trusted servants. They did not want Elder Osaze or anyone else to try to interfere with the spirit's instructions. Over the next 7 days, they quietly gathered all the items the voice had requested. The 7 white kola nuts were easy to find. The queen's personal servant bought them from the market. The 7 white chickens were purchased from different farmers so that no one would become suspicious. The 7 white cloths were woven by the palace seamstresses, who were told they were needed for a special royal ceremony. The 7 cowries came from the king's personal treasure box. The palm wine was provided by the palace winekeeper, and the honey was collected by brave young men who climbed tall trees to reach wild beehives. Elder Osaze noticed that the king and queen seemed happier than usual, but he could not figure out why. He tried to ask questions, but the royal couple gave him vague answers. This made him very nervous. He began to suspect that something was happening that could threaten his plans. On the sixth night, Elder Osaze decided to visit his witch doctor friend in the forest. He wanted to make sure his magic was still working to prevent the queen from getting pregnant. The witch doctor lived in a small hut surrounded by strange objects, dried animal skulls, old pots filled with mysterious liquids, and bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling. When Elder Osaze arrived, the witch doctor was stirring something in a large black pot over a fire. "Ah, Elder Osaze," said the witch doctor without looking up. "I have been expecting you. There is trouble in the spirit world." "What do you mean?" asked Elder Osaze, fear creeping into his voice. The witch doctor finally looked at him with bloodshot eyes. "Someone has been working against our magic. Someone with power greater than mine has interfered with your plans." Elder Osaze felt his blood turn cold. "Can you fix it?" The witch doctor shook his head slowly. "I tried, but every spell I cast bounces back to me. It is as if a wall of light surrounds the queen, protecting her from our dark magic." "Then what should I do?" Elder Osaze asked desperately. "Wait and watch," replied the witch doctor. "If the queen does become pregnant, we will have to think of another plan." On the seventh day, King Oba Ewaresi and Queen Lolodokas returned to River Kapoti with all the items requested by the spirits. The mysterious messenger was waiting for them at the same spot where they had met him before. "You have done well," he said, examining the offerings they had brought. "Now follow my instructions exactly." He told them to place the 7 white kola nuts in a circle on the bank of the river. In the center of the circle, they placed the pot of palm wine and the container of honey. The 7 white chickens were released to run free around the sacred area, and the 7 white cloths were spread on the ground. "Now," said the messenger, "both of you must step into the river again and call upon the ancestors to break the curse that has been placed upon you." The king and queen entered the water and raised their hands toward the sky. Together they called out, "Ancestors of our people, we come before you with humble hearts. We ask you to break the evil magic that has been used against us. We promise to rule our people with justice and kindness, and to raise our children to do the same." As soon as they finished speaking, the water around them began to glow with a soft golden light. The light grew brighter and brighter until it surrounded their entire bodies. They felt a warm sensation spreading through them, starting from their feet and moving up to their heads. The 7 white chickens, which had been running around the riverbank, suddenly stopped and stood perfectly still. At the same moment, the 7 cowries in the king's hand began to vibrate with a musical sound. The mysterious messenger raised his wooden staff toward the sky and spoke in a language that the king and queen did not understand. But somehow they knew that he was asking the spirits to bless them with the gift of children. After several minutes, the golden light faded and everything returned to normal. But King Oba Ewaresi and Queen Lolodokas felt different. They felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. "It is finished," said the messenger. "The curse has been broken. Before the next dry season comes, Queen Lolodokas will carry the future of your kingdom in her womb." The royal couple thanked the messenger with tears of joy in their eyes. But when they turned to give him gifts, he had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. 3 months after the cleansing ritual at River Kapoti, Queen Lolodokas began to feel sick in the mornings. At first, she thought she had eaten something bad, but when the sickness continued for several days, she began to suspect the wonderful truth. She called for the palace medicine woman, an old lady named Mama Kemi, who had been delivering babies in the kingdom for over 40 years. Mama Kemi examined the queen carefully and then broke into a huge smile. "Your Highness," she said, "you are with child." Queen Lolodokas could hardly believe it. She had dreamed of this moment for so long that it felt like a dream. She immediately sent for King Oba Ewaresi, who was in a meeting with his council members. When the king heard the news, he jumped up from his throne and danced around the room like a young man. He hugged his wife and lifted her off the ground, spinning her around in circles. "After all these years," he shouted, "the ancestors have blessed us." The news spread quickly throughout the palace, and soon the entire kingdom knew that their beloved queen was pregnant. People came from all corners of the land to offer congratulations and gifts. Farmers brought their best yams and cassava, fishermen brought the biggest fish they had caught, and craftsmen brought beautiful things they had made with their hands. The whole kingdom was filled with joy and celebration. Music played in the streets, and people danced until late at night. Children ran around singing songs about the coming prince or princess. But there was one person who was not celebrating: Elder Osaze. When Elder Osaze heard that Queen Lolodocus was pregnant, he felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. All his careful plans, all the money he had spent on witch doctors, all the secret sacrifices, everything had been for nothing. He locked himself in his house for 3 days, refusing to see anyone. His wife and children were worried about him, but he would not explain what was wrong. On the 4th day, Elder Osaze made a decision that would bring great tragedy to the kingdom. If he could not prevent the queen from having a baby, he would make sure that the baby would not be fit to rule. That night, he went deep into the forest to visit an even more powerful witch doctor than the one he had been using. This witch doctor lived in a cave and was known for the most evil kinds of magic. "I want you to curse the child in the queen's womb," Elder Osaze told the witch doctor. "Make it so that the baby will be so strange and frightening that the people will reject it." The witch doctor, whose face was covered with scars and whose eyes were completely white, smiled an evil smile. "That will cost you much more than what you have been paying before," he said. "I will pay anything," replied Elder Osaze. "Just make sure that child can never become a proper king or queen." For the next 6 months, Queen Lolodocus carried her baby with great joy. Her belly grew round and big, and everyone could see how happy she was. King Oba Ewaresi would talk to the baby every night, telling stories about the kingdom it would one day rule. The royal couple prepared a beautiful nursery in the palace. They bought the softest clothes for the baby's clothes and the finest wood for a cradle. Queen Lolodocus spent hours sewing tiny shirts and blankets. But Elder Osaze was not idle during this time. Every week, he would sneak out to meet with the evil witch doctor. Together, they performed dark rituals meant to curse the unborn child. The witch doctor would chant evil spells, while Elder Osaze provided money and sacrifices. "The child will be born alive," the witch doctor promised, "but it will be so abnormal that the people will be afraid of it. They will believe it is cursed, and they will demand that it be banished along with the queen." Elder Osaze felt satisfied with this plan. If the queen and her strange child were banished, the throne would still come to him when King Oba Ewaresi died. As the time for the baby's birth approached, the entire kingdom was filled with excitement. People made bets about whether the child would be a boy or a girl. Some said they hoped for a prince who would grow up to be a strong warrior like his father. Others said they wanted a princess who would be kind and gentle like her mother. When Queen Lolodocus went into labor, it was a hot day in the middle of the rainy season. The palace became very busy as servants ran back and forth, bringing hot water and clean clothes. Mama Kemi, the experienced medicine woman, took charge of everything. King Oba Ewarisi paced back and forth outside the birthing room, too nervous to sit down. Elder Osaze was also there, pretending to be concerned, but secretly hoping that his evil plan would work. After many hours of labor, they finally heard the cry of a newborn baby. Mama Kemi's voice called out, "It's a boy! The kingdom has a prince!" King Oba Ewaresi's heart filled with joy, and he started to rush toward the birthing room to see his son and wife. But then he heard something that made his blood freeze. Mama Kemi screamed. It was not a scream of joy or celebration. It was a scream of horror and fear. The king burst into the room and found Mama Kemi standing in the corner, her eyes wide with shock. Queen Lolodocus was lying on the bed, exhausted but conscious, holding a bundle in her arms. "My king," Mama Kemi whispered, her voice shaking, The prince has 2 heads." King Oba Ewaresi could not believe what he was hearing. He moved closer to his wife and looked down at his newborn son. The baby boy was healthy and strong, but where there should have been 1 head, there were 2. Both heads had perfect features, bright eyes, tiny noses, and small mouths. Both heads were breathing normally, and both pairs of eyes looked around with curiosity. Queen Lolodocus was in shock. She had felt something was different during the birth, but she never expected this. She looked at her husband with tears in her eyes. "What does this mean?" she whispered. "Why has this happened to our child?" King Oba Ewaresi did not know what to say. He had never heard of such a thing happening before. He reached out to touch his son, and one of the baby's heads turned toward him and made soft baby sounds. Outside the birthing room, news of the two-headed prince spread like wildfire throughout the palace and then throughout the kingdom. Within hours, everyone in the kingdom knew about the birth of the two-headed prince. People gathered in small groups in the market squares, in their homes, and along the roads, whispering to each other about what this strange birth could mean. The older people, who remembered ancient stories and traditions, said it was a sign of great misfortune coming to the kingdom. Some said it meant that the royal family was cursed. Others believed it was a punishment from the ancestors for some unknown sin. "This is an abomination," some people said. "No child with two heads has ever been born in our kingdom before. This is not natural." The fear spread quickly. Farmers who had been planning to go to their fields stayed home instead. Hunters who normally went into the forest to catch animals were too afraid to leave their houses. Even the brave fishermen refused to go to the river. The markets, which were usually busy with people buying and selling goods, became almost empty. Those who did venture out spoke in hushed voices and kept looking over their shoulders as if they expected something terrible to happen. Children who had been playing happily in the streets now stayed inside with their parents. When they did go out, they walked quickly and quietly, afraid to make noise that might attract the attention of whatever evil forces had caused the prince to be born with two heads. The palace servants were also frightened. Some of them quit their jobs and went back to their villages. Others continued to work but jumped at every sound and avoided going near the royal quarters where the baby was kept. Elder Osei saw that his plan was working perfectly. The kingdom was indeed afraid of the two-headed prince, just as the evil witch doctor had promised. 3 days after the birth, Elder Osei called a secret meeting in his house. He invited the most important men in the kingdom, chiefs, wealthy merchants, and respected elders. About 20 men gathered in his large sitting room as the sun was setting. "My friends," Elder Osei began, his voice serious and concerned, "we must talk about what has happened in our kingdom. The birth of this abnormal child is a sign that something is very wrong." The men nodded and murmured in agreement. "In all our traditions," Elder Osei continued, "a child with two heads is considered an abomination. It brings bad luck, not just to the royal family, but to all of us. Already we can see that people are afraid to go about their normal business." Chief Emeka, an old man with grey hair and a wise face, spoke up. "But what can we do? The child is the king's son." Elder Osei had been waiting for this question. "According to our ancient laws," he said, "when an abomination is born into the royal family, both the child and the mother must be banished from the kingdom to prevent the curse from spreading to all of us." Several men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They respected and loved Queen Lolodokas, and the idea of banishing her seemed cruel. "But Elder Osaze," said another chief, "Queen Lolodokas is a good woman. She has done nothing wrong. How can we punish her for something that is not her fault?" Elder Osaze had prepared for this objection too. "My friends, I know this is painful for all of us. We all love our queen, but we must think about the good of the entire kingdom. If we allow this cursed child to remain among us, who knows what other terrible things might happen? Our crops might fail, our rivers might dry up, our enemies might attack us. We cannot take such risks." The men talked among themselves for a long time. Some agreed with Elder Osei, believing that the traditions must be followed to protect the kingdom. Others felt that banishing the beloved queen would be too harsh a punishment. Finally, Chief Emeka stood up. "This is too important a decision for us to make alone," he said. "We should call a meeting of all the people and let them decide what should be done." Elder Osei was pleased with this suggestion. He was confident that the frightened people would agree to banish the queen and her strange child. 3 days later, a large meeting was held in the village square. Almost everyone in the kingdom came, men, women, and even older children. They sat on wooden benches and on mats spread on the ground, all talking quietly among themselves about the serious matter they had come to discuss. King Oba Ewaresi sat on a special chair at the front of the gathering, looking tired and sad. He had not been sleeping well since his son's birth. Queen Lolodokas was not present. She was still recovering from the birth and caring for the baby. Elder Osazi stood up to address the crowd. He was a good speaker and knew how to influence people's emotions. "People of our great kingdom," he began, "we have gathered here today to discuss a matter that affects all of us. As you all know, Queen Lolodokas has given birth to a child with 2 heads. This has never happened in our kingdom before, and it has filled all of us with fear and worry." The crowd murmured in agreement. Many people nodded their heads. "Our ancestors left us with clear traditions about such matters," Elder Osaze continued. "When an abomination is born, it must be removed from the community to prevent the curse from spreading. This is not about punishing anyone. It is about protecting all of us and our children." A woman in the crowd stood up. "But Elder Osaze, what about Queen Lolodokas? She has been so kind to all of us. She has helped us when we were sick, fed us when we were hungry, and loved us like her own children. How can we turn against her now?" Several other people called out in agreement with the woman. Elder Osaze nodded as if he understood their feelings. "I know this is difficult," he said. "We all love our queen. But love sometimes means making hard choices. If we truly care about her and about our kingdom, we must be willing to make sacrifices for the greater good." An old farmer stood up next. "I have lived in this kingdom for 70 years, he said, "and I have never seen anything like this 2-headed child. Maybe it really is a sign that something bad is coming. Maybe we should listen to Elder Osaze and follow our traditions." Now more people began to nod and talk among themselves. The fear that had been growing in the kingdom made them willing to consider even harsh solutions. But not everyone agreed. A young hunter named Chinonso stood up and spoke boldly. "I think we are being foolish," he said. "The child has done nothing wrong. He is just a baby. How can a tiny baby be dangerous to anyone? And Queen Lolodokas has been nothing but good to us. I say we should support our royal family, not drive them away." Some people clapped for Chinonso, but others shouted at him to sit down. The argument continued for several hours. Elder Osazi kept speaking, reminding people of their fears and their traditions. Gradually, more and more people began to agree with him. King Oba Ewaresi listened to everything but said very little. His heart was breaking as he heard his own people talking about banishing his wife and newborn son. Finally, Elder Osazi called for a vote. "All those who believe we should follow our traditions and ask Queen Lolodokas and her child to leave the kingdom, please stand up." About half the people in the gathering stood up. Then Elder Osaze said, "All those who believe the queen and child should stay, please stand up." Fewer people stood up this time. The fear in the kingdom had won. Elder Osaze smiled with satisfaction. "The people have spoken," he announced. "It is decided that Queen Lolodokas and her child must leave our kingdom within 7 days." King Oba Ewaresi felt as if his heart would break. But he was bound by the traditions of his people, even when those traditions caused him great pain. After the decision to banish Queen Lolodokas and her 2-headed son, the kingdom did not become more peaceful as Elder Osaze had promised. Instead, things got worse. The fear that had started with the birth of the unusual prince grew stronger each day. People were so frightened that they stopped doing the normal things that kept the kingdom running properly. The farmers, who should have been planting seeds for the next season, stayed home and refused to work in their fields. "What if the curse affects our crops?" they asked each other. "What if we plant seeds and nothing grows?" The hunters, who usually provided meat for the markets, would not go into the forest. "The spirits in the forest might be angry," they said. "They might attack us for allowing the abomination to be born." Even the fishermen, who were known for their courage, stopped going to the rivers and streams. The water spirits might have turned against us, they worried. The markets, which had always been the heart of the kingdom's economy, became empty and quiet. Without fresh food from the farms, fish from the rivers, and game from the forest, there was nothing to sell. The few merchants who still tried to do business had to travel to other kingdoms to buy goods, and this made everything very expensive. Women stopped gathering in groups to cook together and share stories. Men stopped meeting in the evenings to drink palm wine and discuss the events of the day. Children stopped playing their games in the streets. The whole kingdom felt like a place where happiness had died. King Oba Ewaresi tried to encourage his people, but they would barely listen to him anymore. Some people whispered that he too was cursed, and that was why his son had been born with two heads. The king spent most of his time sitting alone in his palace, thinking about his wife and baby son, who would soon be forced to leave. Queen Lolodokas cried every day, holding her strange but beautiful baby and wondering where they would go and how they would survive. Elder Osaze, meanwhile, was secretly very pleased with how his plan was working. The kingdom was falling apart, just as he had hoped. When the queen and her child were gone, and when King Oba Ewaresi eventually died from sadness, Elder Osaze would be ready to take over as the new ruler. But Elder Osaze's satisfaction would not last long, because help was coming to the kingdom from an unexpected source. About 2 months after the birth of the two-headed prince, when the kingdom was at its darkest and most fearful, a stranger arrived in the village. His name was Pastor Odafe, and he was an evangelist who traveled from place to place preaching about the Christian faith. Pastor Odafe was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a warm smile. He wore simple clothes and carried only a small bag with a few belongings and his Bible. But there was something special about him, a sense of peace and confidence that made people feel calm when they were near him. He set up a small tent in the center of the village and began talking to anyone who would listen. At first, only a few curious children gathered around him. But as word spread that there was a preacher in town, more adults came to see what he had to say. "I have come to tell you about the love of God," Pastor Odafe said to the small crowd that had gathered. "God loves every person, no matter what they look like or what problems they have. He can bring light into the darkest situations and hope to the most hopeless circumstances." Some people in the crowd laughed at him. "You don't understand," they said. "Our kingdom is cursed. We have a prince with two heads, and now everything is going wrong. Your God cannot help us with something like this." But Pastor Odafe was not discouraged. "My friends," he said gently, "I have seen God work miracles in places where people thought there was no hope. The God I serve is bigger than any curse and stronger than any evil magic." One woman in the crowd spoke up. "Are you saying that the two-headed baby is not a sign of God's anger with us?" Pastor Odafe shook his head. "Sometimes children are born different from what we expect, but that doesn't mean they are cursed or evil. Every child is a gift from God, and God has a purpose for every life, even lives that seem strange to us." This was a completely new idea for most people in the kingdom. They had always believed that unusual births were signs of curses or punishment. Over the next few days, more and more people came to listen to Pastor Odafe. He told them stories from the Bible about people who had seemed hopeless, but whom God had helped in amazing ways. He talked about love being stronger than fear, and about how God could bring good things out of situations that seemed completely bad. Some people began to feel a little hope for the first time in months. After Pastor Odafe had been in the kingdom for about a week, some of the people who had been listening to him decided that the king should meet this interesting preacher. They went to the palace and asked to speak with King Oba Ewaresi. "Your Majesty," they said, "there is a man of God in our village who has been teaching us new things. He says that our kingdom is not cursed, and that God can help us even with the problem of the two-headed prince. Perhaps you would like to meet him." King Oba Ewaresi was desperate for any hope, so he agreed to see Pastor Odafe. The next day, the evangelist was brought to the palace throne room. When Pastor Odafe saw the king, his heart was filled with compassion. King Oba Ewaresi looked like a man who had been carrying a weight too heavy for him. His eyes were sad, and his shoulders drooped with discouragement. "Your Majesty," Pastor Odafe said, bowing respectfully, "I have heard about your situation, and I want you to know that God sees your pain and wants to help you." King Oba Ewaresi sighed deeply. "Pastor, I appreciate your kindness, but I don't see how anyone can help us now. My people have decided that my wife and son must be banished, because they believe the child brings bad luck to our kingdom." Pastor Odafe looked at the king with understanding eyes. "Your Majesty, may I see the child?" The king was surprised by this request. Most people were afraid to even hear about his son, let alone see him. But something about Pastor Odafe's calm manner made the king feel that it would be safe. King Oba Ewaresi led Pastor Odafe to the royal quarters where Queen Lolodokas was caring for their baby. When they entered the room, Queen Lolodokas looked up with tired eyes. She was holding her son, who was sleeping peacefully. Pastor Odafe approached slowly and looked down at the baby. Both heads were perfect and beautiful, with soft skin and tiny features. The baby opened his eyes, all four of them, and looked up at the pastor with innocent curiosity. "What a beautiful child," Pastor Odafe said softly. "I can see God's hand in his creation." Queen Lolodokas began to cry. "You are the first person besides us who has said anything kind about our son," she whispered. Pastor Odafe gently touched one of the baby's hands. "Your Majesty," he said to the king, "this child is not a curse. He is special, yes, but special in God's plan. Sometimes God creates people who are different to teach the rest of us important lessons about love and acceptance." "But the people are afraid," said King Oba Iwarisi. "They say he brings bad luck." "The only bad luck in your kingdom," Pastor Odaf replied, "comes from the fear and superstition that someone has been spreading among your people. This fear is the real enemy, not your innocent child." After spending time with the royal family, Pastor Odafe had an idea. He asked for another meeting with King Oba Ewaresi, this time with the king's advisors present. When the meeting was arranged, Elder Osaze was required to attend as the chief advisor. He came reluctantly, not liking this foreign preacher who was filling people's heads with strange new ideas. "Your Majesty," Pastor Odafe began, "I would like your permission to hold a special church program in your kingdom. I want to call it, 'Our Liberation Has Come.' I believe that through prayer and teaching, we can help your people overcome their fear and understand the truth about God's love." Several of the king's advisors looked interested. They had seen how Pastor Odaf's presence was already beginning to bring some calm to certain parts of the kingdom. But Elder Osaze stood up immediately. "Your Majesty, I must protest this idea strongly," he said. "Our kingdom has its own traditions and customs that have been followed for hundreds of years, since the time of our great-great-grandfathers. We cannot allow outsiders to come and change our ways with foreign religions." Elder Osaze was afraid that Pastor Odafe might somehow interfere with his plans, or worse, discover his involvement in cursing the royal baby. "These traditions have served us well," Elder Osaze continued, "and we must not abandon them now just because we are facing difficulties. The solution to our problems lies in following our ancient customs more strictly, not in adopting new beliefs." But King Oba Ewaresi had seen something in Pastor Odafe that gave him hope for the first time in months. The pastor's words about love and acceptance had touched his heart, especially when he saw how kindly the man had treated his two-headed son. "Elder Osaze," the king said, "I understand your concerns about our traditions. But our traditions have not brought us peace in this situation. Instead, they have filled our kingdom with fear and division. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach." "Your Majesty," Elder Osaze said desperately, "if we allow this foreign religion to take root in our kingdom, who knows what other changes will follow? Our people might abandon their respect for the royal family, they might stop following our laws, they might even forget who they are as a people." But other advisors began to speak up in favor of Pastor Odaf's proposal. Chief Emeka, who had been one of the more reasonable voices during the earlier debates, said, "I have spoken with some of the people who have been listening to this pastor. They seem calmer and more hopeful than they have been in weeks. Perhaps we should give his program a chance." After much discussion, King Oba Ewaresi made his decision. "Pastor Odafe, you have my permission to hold your program in our kingdom. You may use the large field near the market square for your meetings." Elder Osaze's face darkened with anger, but he could not openly oppose the king's decision without seeming disrespectful. Pastor Odafe was grateful for the king's permission and immediately began preparing for his crusade program. He and the few church members who had traveled with him worked hard to spread the word throughout the kingdom. They made simple flyers from palm leaves and distributed them to every household. The flyers announced, "Our liberation has come, a program of hope and healing. Come and learn about God's love for every person. All are welcome, including those who are different or afraid." The response from the people was mixed. Some were curious and excited about the possibility of finding relief from their fears. Others were suspicious and worried about abandoning their traditional beliefs. But most people decided to attend, if only to see what this foreign preacher had to say. Elder Osaze, meanwhile, was working frantically to discourage people from attending the program. He visited houses throughout the kingdom, warning people about the dangers of foreign religions. "These Christians will try to turn you away from your ancestors," he told them. "They will tell you that our traditional ways are evil. If you listen to them, the spirits of our forefathers will be angry with us, and even worse, things will happen to our kingdom." But despite Elder Osaze's efforts, many people were planning to attend Pastor Odafi's program. The fear and unhappiness in the kingdom had become so great that people were willing to try almost anything that might bring them peace. 3 days before the program was scheduled to begin, Elder Osaze made one final desperate attempt to stop it. He went to the evil witch doctor in the cave and paid him a large sum of money. "I want you to cast a spell on this pastor and his program," Elder Osaze demanded. "Make sure that nothing good comes from it. Make the people more afraid than ever." The witch doctor took the money and promised to help. But secretly he was worried. He had been having strange dreams lately, dreams about bright lights chasing away darkness. He was beginning to suspect that the power behind Pastor Odafe might be stronger than his own magic. On the first day of the crusade program, hundreds of people gathered in the large field near the market square. Pastor Odafe had set up a simple stage made from wooden planks, and chairs had been arranged in rows for the audience. As the sun was setting, Pastor Odafe stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd. He could see curiosity, hope, fear, and skepticism in the faces before him. "Friends," he began in a clear, strong voice, "I want to thank you for coming tonight. I know that many of you are afraid and confused about what has been happening in your kingdom. You have been told that you are cursed, that bad luck has come upon you because of the birth of a special child. But I am here to tell you a different story." The crowd listened quietly as Pastor Odafe continued. "I am here to tell you about a God who loves every person, no matter what they look like or what challenges they face. This God does not curse people with unusual children. Instead, he creates each person with love and purpose, even when we don't understand his plans." Some people in the crowd began to murmur among themselves. This was indeed very different from what they had been taught all their lives. "Tonight," Pastor Odafe said, "I want to tell you the story of a man who was born blind. People thought he was cursed because of his blindness. But Jesus, the Son of God, healed this man and explained that he had been born blind not because of any curse, but so that God's power could be shown through his life." Pastor Odafe went on to tell more stories from the Bible about people who had seemed cursed or hopeless, but whom God had helped in miraculous ways. He talked about how fear and superstition could make people do cruel things to each other, and how God's love was the answer to all fear. At the end of the first night's program, about 50 people came forward to learn more about Christianity. They said they wanted to stop living in fear and start living with hope. Elder Osaze, who had been watching from the back of the crowd, was very angry. The program was having exactly the opposite effect from what he had hoped. Each night of the 7-day crusade program, more people came to listen to Pastor Odafe. Word spread throughout the kingdom that the evangelist's teachings were bringing peace to troubled hearts and hope to desperate situations. On the third night, something remarkable happened. A woman named Adaise brought her sick daughter to the program. The little girl had been ill for weeks, with a fever that would not break. The kingdom's traditional healers had not been able to help her. Pastor Odafe prayed for the sick child in front of the entire crowd. As he prayed, the little girl's fever broke, and she sat up for the first time in days, smiling and asking for food. The crowd gasped in amazement. They had never seen anything like this before. On the fourth night, an old man who had been blind for 20 years came to the program. Pastor Odafe prayed for him as well, and the man's sight was restored. He wept with joy as he looked around and saw his family's faces clearly for the first time in decades. Word of these miracles spread quickly throughout the kingdom. People who had been afraid to leave their houses began venturing out. Farmers started talking about returning to their fields. The atmosphere of fear that had gripped the kingdom for months was beginning to lift. But the most important moment came on the fifth night of the program. As Pastor Odafe was preaching about God's love for all people, regardless of how they looked or what challenges they faced, King Oba Ewaresi and Queen Lolo Dokas arrived at the meeting. They were carrying their two-headed son. The crowd fell silent as the royal family approached the stage. Many people had not seen the unusual prince since his birth, and they stared with wide eyes. Pastor Odafe smiled and welcomed the royal family. "Your Majesties," he said, "please come forward. Let the people see this beautiful child that God has blessed you with." Queen Lolodokas was nervous, but she trusted Pastor Odafe. She held up her baby so that everyone could see him clearly. The baby was now several months old and had grown bigger and stronger. Both of his heads were perfectly formed and beautiful. As the crowd watched, one head smiled and made happy baby sounds, while the other head looked around with bright, intelligent eyes. "People of this kingdom," Pastor Odafe said, in a voice that carried clearly across the field, "look at this child. Do you see evil? Do you see a curse? Or do you see an innocent baby who deserves love and acceptance just like any other child?" Some people in the crowd began to cry. They realized that their fear had made them cruel to their beloved royal family. Pastor Odafe continued, "This child is not your enemy. The real enemy is the fear and superstition that has been planted in your hearts by someone who wants to divide this kingdom. Tonight, I call on all of you to reject that fear and choose love instead." At that moment, something unexpected happened. Elder Osezi, who had been trying to stay hidden in the crowd, suddenly stood up and shouted, "Don't listen to this foreigner. He's trying to destroy our traditions. The child is cursed, and the queen should be banished." But as soon as Elder Osezi spoke these words, something strange occurred. A strong wind began to blow across the field, even though the night had been completely still. The wind seemed to be coming from the direction of the stage where Pastor Odafe stood. Then, to everyone's amazement, Elder Osezi began to speak words that he had not intended to say. "I am the one," he shouted, his voice sounding strange and different. "I am the one who cursed this child. I paid witch doctors to prevent the queen from getting pregnant, and when that failed, I paid them to curse the baby in her womb. I wanted the throne for myself." The crowd gasped in shock. Elder Osezi tried to stop speaking, but the words kept pouring out of his mouth. "I have been working against the royal family for years. I am the real enemy of this kingdom, not the innocent baby. The curse on this child came from my evil heart, not from the gods or ancestors." Elder Osezi fell to his knees, unable to control what he was saying. The truth was being forced out of him by a power greater than himself. The revelation of Elder Osezi's treachery sent shockwaves through the crowd. People could hardly believe that the man they had trusted as their leader had been working against them all along. King Oba Ewaresi was filled with both anger and sadness. "Elder Osezi," he said, "you were like a brother to me. I trusted you with my life and the life of my family. How could you betray us so completely?" Elder Osezi, still unable to control his words, continued confessing, "I was jealous of your power and your people's love for you. I wanted to be king myself. I thought if I could prevent you from having an heir, the throne would come to me when you died." The crowd began to murmur angrily. Some people shouted for Elder Osezi to be punished severely for his crimes against the royal family and the kingdom. But Pastor Odafe raised his hand in silence. For silence. "People of this kingdom," he said, "tonight we have seen the power of truth to set us free from lies and fear. Elder Osezi has done terrible things, but now that his deeds are exposed, his power to harm you is broken." Pastor Odafe then did something that surprised everyone. He walked over to where Elder Osezi was kneeling and placed his hand on the man's head. "Elder Osezi," he said, "you have done great evil, but God's mercy is greater than any sin. If you truly repent of what you have done and ask for forgiveness, even you can be forgiven." Elder Osezi looked up with tears in his eyes. The supernatural power that had been forcing him to confess was gone, but now he was speaking from his own heart. "I have been so wrong," he said. "I have hurt innocent people because of my own greed and jealousy. King Oba Ewaresi, Queen Lolo Dokas, please forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but I am truly sorry for what I have done to you and your son." King Oba Ewerezi looked at the man who had caused him so much pain. It was difficult to forgive such betrayal, but the king had been deeply moved by Pastor Odafe's teachings about mercy and love. "Elder Osaze," he said finally with tears, "what you did was terrible, and there must be consequences for your actions. But I forgive you, and I pray that God will help you find a better path." Pastor Odafe then turned to address the crowd again. "Now that the truth has been revealed, let us pray for the breaking of every curse that was placed on this royal family and this kingdom." He asked everyone in the crowd to join hands and pray together. Hundreds of voices rose up in prayer, asking God to remove all the effects of Elder Osaze's evil magic and to bring healing to their kingdom. As they prayed, many people reported feeling a sense of lightness and peace that they had not experienced in months. The fear that had been weighing on their hearts seemed to lift away like smoke in the wind. When the prayer ended, Pastor Odafe made an announcement that brought tears of joy to many eyes. "People of this kingdom," he said, "the curse on your prince is broken. This child is no longer a sign of misfortune. He is a symbol of God's power to bring good out of difficult situations. I believe that as he grows up, he will become a wise and compassionate leader who will show the world that being different does not mean being less valuable." The remaining 2 nights of the crusade program were filled with celebration and renewed hope. People came from neighboring kingdoms to hear about the miracles that had taken place and to see the two-headed prince who was no longer considered cursed. Many people in the kingdom decided to become Christians, inspired by the love and acceptance they had witnessed. But Pastor Odafe was careful to teach them that following Christ did not mean completely abandoning all their cultural traditions, only the harmful practices that were based on fear and superstition. Elder Osezi was stripped of his position as village prime minister and sentenced to work on the royal farms for 5 years as punishment for his crimes. But he accepted this sentence gratefully, knowing that he deserved far worse. He also became a Christian and spent his remaining years trying to make up for the harm he had caused. The kingdom began to return to normal, but it was a better kind of normal than before. The farmers went back to their fields with renewed enthusiasm. The hunters returned to the forest. The fishermen went back to the rivers. The markets became busy and prosperous again. But most importantly, the people had learned valuable lessons about the dangers of fear and superstition and about the power of love and acceptance to heal even the deepest divisions. Queen Lolo Dokas was no longer in danger of being banished. Instead, she was honored more than ever before as the mother of the special prince who had taught the kingdom so much about God's love for all people. As the months passed, the two-headed prince grew strong and healthy. Both of his heads developed normally, and it became clear that he was an unusually intelligent child. By the time he was 1 year old, he could speak simple words from both mouths, and he seemed to understand everything that was said to him. The people of the kingdom, who had once been afraid of him, now took pride in their unique prince. Children would come to the palace to play with him, and they found him to be gentle and kind despite his unusual appearance. Pastor Odaf stayed in the kingdom for several more months, helping to establish a church and training local people to become Christian leaders. Before he left to continue his evangelistic work in other places, he had a private conversation with King Oba Iwaresi. "Your Majesty," he said, "I believe that your son has been chosen by God for a special purpose. As he grows up, he will face challenges because of how he looks, but he will also have unique opportunities to teach people about acceptance and love. Raise him to be wise and compassionate, and he will become a leader who changes the world for the better." King Oba Ewarisi nodded thoughtfully. "Pastor Odafe, you have given my family and my kingdom a gift that we can never repay. You showed us that what seems like a curse can actually be a blessing in disguise." Years later, when the two-headed prince grew up to become king, he ruled with extraordinary wisdom and compassion. Leaders from many nations came to seek his advice, and he became famous throughout West Africa as the king who taught the world that being different was not something to fear, but something to celebrate. The kingdom prospered under his rule, and people often said that their greatest blessing had come disguised as their greatest fear. And so the story that began with sadness and fear ended with joy and hope, proving that with faith, love, and courage, Even the most difficult situations can be transformed into something beautiful. Many years after these events, when Pastor Odafe was an old man, he would often tell the story of the two-headed prince of Warri South to other evangelists and church leaders. Never underestimate the power of God to work through situations that seem hopeless, he would say. Sometimes what looks like a curse is actually a blessing waiting to be revealed. Our job is not to judge or fear what we don't understand, but to love and accept all people as God's precious children. The story spread throughout Nigeria and beyond, becoming a legend that parents told their children to teach them about the importance of accepting people who are different. And in Warri South local government area, the statue of the wise two-headed king still stands in the center of the town square, reminding everyone who sees it that true leadership comes not from looking like everyone else, but from having a heart full of love for all people. The inscription on the statue reads, "In memory of King Oba Ewaresi Oluwasi II, who taught us that being different is not a curse, but a gift from God to help us learn how to love more deeply." This is how the kingdom learned that liberation truly had come. Not through driving away what seemed strange or frightening, but through embracing it with open hearts and minds. This story reminds us that fear and prejudice can make us cruel to innocent people, but love and understanding can transform any situation. It teaches us that every person, no matter how different they may seem, has value and deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. Most importantly, it shows us that what we think is our greatest problem might actually be the key to our greatest blessing. The end of the story. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel for more content like this. Make sure you drop your comment and share your thoughts with us. Thanks.